In this video, you will learn how to cut out hair in Photoshop. To follow along, you can download the sample files from the Adobe page for this tutorial. The main file that we're going to work with contains two layers, a portrait and a blue background. We also have a second image that we're going to use to create a custom brush to paint in hair. Start by removing the background from the portrait layer. You can do this with just one click. With the portrait layer selected, go to the Properties panel and click on the Remove Background button under Quick Actions. Photoshop will then use machine learning technology to determine the main subject, and it will create a layer mask to isolate it from the background. In this case, Photoshop does an excellent job, but we can refine the mask further to get better results. Click on the Layer Mask thumbnail, then from the Properties panel, click on Selected Mask. To better see the mask edge, set the view to on black and the opacity to 100%. Then select the brush tool. If you need to, resize the brush by tapping on the bracket keys. You can find them next to the P key on most English keyboards. Then paint over areas that should have not been masked out, like the bottom part of her scarf. Next, fine-tune the mask with the global refinement sliders. Start with the smooth slider to reduce mask edge jaggedness. Then, soften the edges by increasing the feather. Next, we will refine the hair, but we don't want these slider adjustments to affect the hair strands that we will reveal in the next step, so apply these adjustments to the mask. Make sure that under Output Settings, you set the Output To drop-down to Layer Mask and press OK. Then, go back into the Selected Mask workspace to refine the hair. From the toolbar, select the Refine Edge brush tool and paint over the edge of the mask around the hair to try to mask in as many of the original hair strands as possible. Again, you can use the square bracket keys to resize the brush. Next, use the global adjustments to fine-tune the edge of the mask. You can increase contrast. Then shift the edge of the mask inward by dragging the slider to the left. Press OK when you're done. The mask is much better now, but it's not perfect. It is challenging to select every strand of hair in images with busy backgrounds. The trick to masking something so difficult is to disregard the challenging areas and simply paint in digital hair where necessary. Go to the second image provided for this tutorial, and we will use it to create a custom hairbrush to paint in small strands of hair. Start by selecting the crop tool and drag the right center handle inward to isolate the left side of her head. Commit the changes by pressing the Enter key on Windows, the Return key on the Mac. Next, desaturate the image by going into Image, Adjustments, Desaturate. Then, you need to make the background white and the hair completely black. To do so, you can go into Image, Adjustments, Levels. Drag the center point to the right to darken the hair. Then drag the white point to the left to make the background as white as possible. Fine-tune the sliders so that you don't lose too much detail in the hair, and press OK. Select the Dodge tool, set the range to highlights and the exposure to 50%, and paint over the bottom left corner to make the light gray pixels white. Then switch over into the Burn tool, set the range to shadows and the exposure to 50%, and paint over the hair to make the dark pixels black. Next, select the Brush tool. To make this image into a brush, go into Edit, Define Brush Preset. Name your brush. I'll call mine Hair, and commit the changes. If you have the brush tool active, your custom brush will automatically load. Go back into your working document, select the background layer, and create a new blank layer. Then you can use the bracket keys on the keyboard to resize the brush to match the hair on the original image. I'm tapping on the left bracket key to make my brush smaller. When using the brush tool, you can hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, to temporarily activate the eyedropper tool to select a color to paint with. I'll hover over this light blonde area and then I'll click to set this color as my foreground color. You can then click once to paint the strands of hair. If you didn't make the hair's background completely white while creating the brush, then you will see part of it when you paint. To fix it, fine-tune the source image until you get a white background and create a new brush. Next, use the Move tool to place the layer into position. You can press Ctrl-T on Windows, Command-T on the Mac to transform. Click and drag just outside of the corner handles to rotate the layer. And you can right-click and select Warp to distort the layer and match it as best as possible to the original photo. When you're done, click on the check mark to commit the changes. To save time, I'll duplicate the layer by pressing Ctrl J, Command J on the Mac. Then I'll press Ctrl T, Command T to transform. Right click and select Flip Horizontal. I'll move the layer to the other side, rotate it, and drag it down a bit. Then I'll commit the changes. Part of her hair is blurry because of the shallow depth of field, so we will need to match that blur. Go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. A blur of 1 pixel should work. Press OK, and this creates a much more realistic effect. You will need to repeat these steps several times using different hair colors to get a better result. This is what my final image looks like, and this is the photo in front of different backgrounds. Now that you know how to mask hair in Photoshop, go ahead and try this custom hair technique on your photos. In this video, you will learn how to match a color onto any object in Photoshop. To follow along, you can download the sample file from the Adobe page for this tutorial. Our working document contains 2 layers, a photo of a room and the yellow circle, which is the color that we're going to reference for the color match. The goal of this tutorial is to apply this yellow color to the couch. Before we get into that, we need to understand an essential concept about how color works inside the HSB color system. If you double click on the foreground color, the color picker will come up and you will be able to select any color that you want. When you drag over the color gradient or the hue slider, you'll notice that the values in the HSB boxes change depending on the color that you select. HSB stands for hue, saturation, and brightness, which are the 3 color components that we need to understand to complete this advanced color matching technique. Hue is what color something is. Is it orange, green, blue, magenta, or red? Saturation is the intensity of that color, a vibrant red or completely desaturated. And brightness is how light or dark the color is. A combination of these components will make up all the colors that you see in Photoshop. In this video, we're going to match the hue and saturation of the yellow circle onto the couch. Then we're going to try to match the brightness as close as possible. You can't match all 3 components of the yellow color to the couch because you'll end up with a flat yellow couch with no shape or details. You need the different levels of brightness, the highlights and shadows to give the couch its shape and texture. The first step is to select the couch. From the toolbar, select the Object Selection tool, and with the background layer active, click and drag a rectangle that covers the couch. Photoshop will then use machine learning technology to select the couch. If you inadvertently select an area that you did not intend to select, then you can subtract from the selection by going into the options bar and making sure that Object Subtract is enabled, and hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click and drag over the blanket to deselect. You don't have to be precise, you can fine-tune the mask later. Then you can create a group and click on the layer mask icon to create a layer mask based on the selection. The reason that we're applying the mask to the group is so that one mask can control multiple adjustment layers. If you need to edit the mask, you will only have to do it once. Next, create a solid color fill layer and click on the yellow circle to apply that yellow color. And press OK. Currently, the solid fill layer is applying all 3 components of the yellow color to the couch: the hue, saturation, and brightness, which is why it looks completely flat. To keep the hue and saturation of the yellow, but use the brightness of the couch to bring back the detail, you can use a blending mode. In the blending mode dropdown, you'll notice the 4 blending modes below this line. These blending modes control 1 or more of the color components: hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. To match the hue and saturation, you can use the color blending mode, which combines both. Next, we can adjust the brightness, and for that, you can create a levels adjustment layer. Drag the color fill layer above the levels adjustment layer. Then select the levels adjustment, and from the properties panel, use the highlight slider to brighten the couch. You can then use the midpoint slider to increase contrast. If you made a strong highlight on the cushions, you can drag the white point slider to the left to reduce it. This makes the brightest point on the couch a light gray and not white. At this point, you can fine-tune the mask if necessary. And as simple as that, we've applied the yellow to the couch. If you're wondering why we didn't use a hue and saturation adjustment layer for this, then let me show you why. I'll disable the couch group, and I'll hold Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and click on the layer mask thumbnail to load the couch as a selection. With the group selected, I'm going to create a hue and saturation adjustment layer. I'll adjust the hue to get the yellow. Then I'll increase the saturation. And this is where the problem arises. If I adjust the lightness slider to get a brighter yellow, I'll wash out the shadows of the couch, making it look very flat. Even if I click on the colorize checkbox and apply the proper hue and saturation adjustments, you will still end up with the same problem when you adjust the lightness. By splitting the components into two layers, you have complete control over the color and brightness, and you don't lose the shadows on the couch. You can control them independently. Now that you know how to match colors in Photoshop, go ahead and try this color matching technique on your photos. In this video, you will learn how to replace skies in Photoshop. To follow along, you can download the sample files from the Adobe page for this tutorial. These are the images. To replace the sky, we will use the blend if sliders found in the layer style dialog. Before we get into that, let's look at the RGB channels in the background image. I'll disable the sky layer. Then I'll go into Window and Channels. In this panel, you will see the three channels that make up this image. The combination of light in the red, green, and blue channels make up all the colors that you see in this photo. You can use these channels to create a mask, or use their luminosity as a reference to hide or show pixels with the blend if command. Notice that the blue channel has more contrast between the sky and the foreground elements than the other channels. The sky is bright, almost white, and the foreground elements are dark. Keep this in mind because the dark and bright points in the blend if command will reference the brightness of this channel. Click on RGB and then go back into the layers panel, and we will start working on the new sky and the reflection on the water. Enable the sky layer, and from the toolbar select the rectangular marquee tool and click and drag down from the top left corner to select the sky. Make sure that the sky layer is active and click on the layer mask icon to hide the areas that were not selected. Then select the move tool and click and drag the sky layer up until it is about where the sky in the background is. Now create the layer that will become the reflection of the sky on the water. Duplicate the layer by pressing Ctrl J on Windows, Command J on the Mac. Then flip it upside down by pressing Ctrl T, Command T on the Mac to transform, and right click and select Flip Vertical. Then drag the inverted sky layer down until it lines up with the bottom of the original sky layer. Now let's work on hiding the sky from the background layer. First, drag the background layer above the two sky layers. Then click on the FX icon from the Layers panel and select Blending Options to bring up the Layer Style window. From here, you can use the Blend If sliders to show or reveal pixels based on the image luminosity or the luminosity of each RGB channel. Remember that the blue channel has the strongest contrast between the sky and the foreground. The sky is almost white and the foreground elements are dark. So we will select blue from the dropdown. If you drag the white point to the left, you will hide the areas that were bright in the blue channel. Notice how the sky starts disappearing because it was bright in the blue channel and it reveals the image below. To create a smoother transition between visible and invisible pixels, you can hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the white point to split it in half. Then drag the left half further to the left to create a smoother transition. When you're happy with the blend, press OK. It is very important to note that Blend If is not just hiding blue objects in the photo. Blend If is hiding anything that is bright in the blue channel, which is why Blend If affected the buildings, the bridge, and the ice on the water. To bring back those areas and any other area that you want to keep, duplicate the background layer by pressing Ctrl J on Windows, Command J on the Mac. Then remove the Blend If from this layer by right-clicking on the double square icon to the right of the layer and selecting Clear Layer Style. Then, from the toolbar, select the Quick Selection tool and select areas that you want to keep. You don't have to be precise. You can fine-tune later. In some areas, you will have to tap on the left bracket key to make the brush smaller and select the finer details. Make sure that you select the buildings reflected on the water because you don't want the clouds to go over them. Also, select the icy areas on the sides. When you're done, click on the layer mask icon to create a mask, which will keep only the areas that you selected and hide everything else. The only problem now is that the new sky is much darker than the original. The sky is what illuminates everything in a scene, and when you replace a sky, the new sky will probably not match the luminosity of your photo and you will need to adjust it. To do so, click on the top sky copy and from the new adjustment layer icon, select Levels. From the Properties panel, you can drag the black point to the right to brighten the new sky to match the brightness of the original sky. Then, you can use the midpoint slider to adjust the contrast. At this point, you can fine-tune the blend if, the layer mask, or the levels adjustment to get a better result. Now that you know how to replace skies in Photoshop, go ahead and try this blend if technique on your photos.